The 1979 revolution had triumphed, but Iran still lacked a stabilized structure. The Iranian army was undergoing a profound transformation at the command level. Part of the senior cadre had either left the country or been removed from the structure. At the same time, the army's involvement in street crackdowns in the months leading up to the revolution had created a serious rift between society and the military. The result was an institution that, while still standing organizationally, was in a fragile state in terms of cohesion, trust, and command. The only branch of the military that had suffered relatively little from the purges was the Navy, whose primary mission was Bandar Abbas and the Strait of Hormuz, the very place that is now the focus of media attention. I am here in Bandar Abbas and the Strait of Hormuz to recount the story of this region and this strategic strait. Bandar Abbas, the winter of 1979. This was the condition of Iran's naval vessels at the time. Warships were stationed in Bandar Abbas almost like exhibits, open for public visits. There were no signs that they were operational for controlling an international waterway. Under such circumstances, in Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, a serious assessment of Iran's military situation took shape. Saddam Hussein believed Iran was in a position where a military blow could force it to withdraw from the shores of the Persian Gulf, especially from the Strait of Hormuz and the strategic islands within it. He wanted revenge for a historic day, when the ship Ibn Sina, under the protection of the Iranian military, passed through the Arvand Road and broke the blockade the Iraqi president had declared.
ساعت 10:32 بامداد حرکت کشتی ابن سینا اسکورت چند ناوچه از نیروی دریایی ارتش شاهنشاهی ایران.
He intended to compensate for that humiliation in the southern Persian Gulf, despite lacking both the necessary air range and the naval capability to operate effectively at that distance. Even so, Saddam Hussein saw this situation not as a risk, but as an opportunity. His calculations were based on several assumptions. First, that Iran's military had been weakened and could be broken. Second, that Iran's political structure was consumed by internal conflicts after the revolution. And third, that the international reaction to the war would be limited and likely tilt in favor of the Ba'athist Iraq, since the Soviet Union supported Saddam Hussein, and the United States, after the seizure of its embassy in Tehran, was officially an enemy of Iran. On this basis, on September 22, 1980, Iraq's attack on Iran began, an assault intended to be short, swift, and decisive. Saddam Hussein had also mentioned the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's islands as reasons for initiating the war.
The Iraqis might then decide that now was the time to ask the Soviet Union to fulfill its commitments under the 1972 Mutual Assistance Treaty, in which case the Iraqis would ask the Russians to help them in their fight against Iran Iran now being helped by the United States. And I find this a very difficult proposition. If, in fact, the Iraqis do ask the Russians to make good their commitments under the 72 treaty, then, of course, the Americans are going to be in a very difficult situation. Are they going to help the Iranians? I find it difficult to believe that President Carter, in view of what's happened to the hostages, would now be prepared to go in and help the Iranians fight a war against the Iraqis. But on the other hand, Iran may then decide that they will do something to stop international traffic through the Gulf of Hormuz. If they did that, and the Americans had already refused to help the Iranians, the Americans would have little choice but to open that seaway again, and they would do it with the carrier task force that's now in the Indian Ocean.
For Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, everything unraveled within the very first week. Bombings reached Iran's Kharg Island. Loading piers, storage tanks, and oil transfer facilities were all targeted. Iraq sought to sever the chain that carried oil from the wells to the sea in order to halt Iran's exports. The attacks continued not once, but over successive weeks, each time with the assumption that the final blow would be delivered. But Kharg did not fall out of operation. This is precisely the kind of experience that 50 years later, Donald Trump would also encounter. Iranian civilians would head towards Kharg, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranian islands using personal vessels to prevent their fall.
والا حقیقت راستش ما نزدیک 30 ساله که دارم صیادی میکنم و این 30 سال که دارم صیادی میکنم با عنوان یه تمرینی بوده برای من، به عنوان یه تمرینی بوده که چی که من با همین قایق صیادی کوچیکی که دارم از این کشورم و از این جزیره ها و این جزایر بوموسا از جان و مایه بذاریم و ازشون دفاع بکنیم.
آمریکا هیچ غلطی نمیتونه بکنه. ای همه بسیجیان دلاور بندر لنگه، رودان، بندر عباس.
But at that time, Saddam truly underestimated the importance of Iran's border populations. He believed that through military force, Iran could be turned into a weak, fragmented country. Infrastructure was damaged, some facilities were temporarily taken out of operation, and export volumes declined. But what Baghdad had expected did not happen. Oil was still being loaded at Kharg. Ships moved, delayed, at risk, but still moving. Iranians filled their own vessels with oil and transported it to Larak Island. There, they sold it to tankers operating within the Strait of Hormuz. The strait lay in a position beyond the reach of Iraqi aircraft. It was here that a flaw in Iraq's initial calculations became clear. Attacking infrastructure alone was not enough. Even if facilities were damaged, there was still the possibility of repair, replacement, and continued operation. Iran's economy had been hit, but it had not been crippled. As a result, the target shifted. If the island could not be destroyed, then the route had to be targeted. Saddam Hussein decided to strike at Iran's economic artery.
به صورت مسلم واردات ما کامل قطع میشه. واردات اون موقع با واردات الان قابل مقایسه نیست. اون موقع پنیر ما همش از خارج وارد میشه. تخم مرغ ما از خارج وارد میشه. پودر ماشین لباسشویی از خارج وارد میشه. نمیدونم اسباب بازی از خارج وارد میشه. الان را شما نبینید که تولید کننده های ما دغدغه‌شون چگونه صادر کردن است. اون موقع همه چیز ما برای اداره کشور و اداره جنگ وارد میشد.
Meanwhile, in Iran, a man served as the representative of the leadership in the Supreme Defense Council. A man whose belief in military matters was rooted in the localization of the defense industry, and who held that this industry must be developed by domestic elites. Hujjatul Islam Sayyid Ali Khamenei is seen here visiting a center in the very first year of the war. The center is called Hadid, an Arabic word meaning iron, and one that appears in the Holy Quran. The use of this name signaled the firm resolve of those who intended to produce weapons there. The work being done at the site was at that stage limited to repairing light mortars and a number of very basic weapons. But in this visit, Hujjatul Islam Sayyid Ali Khamenei articulated a strategy, one that would permanently alter the balance of the game in West Asia. In 1981, the Arab countries backing Saddam Hussein had only one path to defeating Iran, and even that had failed. So when attacks on Kharg's facilities did not succeed in halting Iran's oil exports, they decided to finance Iraq's war effort instead. The Iraqi dictator, in turn, changed his operational model. From 1981 onward, the targets were no longer just platforms and storage facilities. Ships themselves were added to the list of targets as a vital link in Iran's trade chain. Vessels heading towards Iran or departing from terminals such as Kharg Island were declared legitimate targets. This marked the beginning of a phase later known as the Tanker War.
در حالی که قیمت نفت جهانی $18 بود، قیمت نفت ما شد $6. در حالی که ما باید 3 میلیون بشکه در روز صادر می‌کردیم، در بعضی از روزها صادرات نفت جمهوری اسلامی به زیر 100,000 بشکه رسید.
In the early years of the Iran-Iraq War, Baghdad still lacked the necessary tools to strike at Iran's vital oil export lifeline, especially since its navy had been effectively destroyed in combat with Iran. This followed the well-known battle carried out by Iran's Navy and Air Force in November 1980. In the operation known as Morvarid, literally meaning pearl, Iran destroyed Iraq's 2 main oil platforms, leaving the country without access to the Persian Gulf. At the time, a significant portion of Iraq's cargo loading and unloading was conducted through the port of Qasr, located on the western shore of the Arvand Route. The Iranian military had effectively blinded its enemies' access to the Persian Gulf. As a result, Iraq turned to a new approach, moving towards bombing operations over the Strait of Hormuz.
بسیار غیر منتظره بود و انتظار نداشتن که دولت فرانسه در شرایط جنگ چنین اسلحه‌هایی به دولت عراق تحویل بده، در حالی که در دنیا شما میدونید که سابقه داره که مواقعی به دلایلی تعهدات عمل نشدن و جا داشت که دولت فرانسه در چنین شرایط حادی که عراق با ایران در جنگ هست از تحویل میراش‌ها خودداری بکنه.
French-made Dassault Mirage F-1s, the fast, agile fighters of the Iraqi Air Force, began flying over the Persian Gulf in the early 1980s. However, their range was insufficient to reach Shahid Raja'i port in Bandar Abbas, and they had only limited capability to carry anti-ship missiles. This restricted their role in directly threatening Iran's oil routes. As a result, for several years, the Strait of Hormuz remained relatively secure for Iran until a different kind of dragon appeared in the skies over the Persian Gulf. 2 years later, the balance of the game shifted. Iraq could now reach the strait as well, because for the first time in the world, a first world country had leased aircraft to a third world country. In 1983, 5 Dassault Breguet Super Étendard aircraft entered service with Iraq. Small but deadly. Their compact size made them difficult to detect and less visible on radar, allowing them to approach ships with ease. But their true power lay not in their size, but in what they carried. Exocet missile anti-ship missiles. The Exocet missile was like a highly advanced bow and arrow. With a range of about 40 to 50 kilometers, it could strike an oil tanker from a distance before anyone had time to react. Its devastating power became evident a few years later, when an Iraqi aircraft mistakenly fired at an American vessel, killing 37 US servicemen. At the time, such missiles were extremely rare for aircraft, and only a few countries in the world possessed this technology. The Super Étendard was one of the limited platforms capable of carrying the Exocet, which is why those 5 small aircraft represented a major threat. With the introduction of this combination, Iraq was able to significantly extend its operational reach in the Persian Gulf. Iraqi jets no longer needed to approach close to Iran's shores. It was enough to launch missiles from a safe distance and strike Iranian oil tankers. At the same time, Aerospatiale SA-321 Super Frelon helicopters, already in Baghdad's possession since the 1970s, along with Mirage F-1s, were also equipped with Exocet missiles. Fire was now raining down from the sky onto Iran's trade.
نیروی دریایی سپاه در این وضعیت به خلیج فارس اومد که هم زمین بازی رو متناسب با تعریف ما قرار بدهد و اصلا توان دریایی رو و چگونه جنگیدن رو با یک تئوری جدید پایه‌گذاری بکنند.
But during this period, something was emerging in the Persian Gulf. A new phenomenon that initially received little attention. A force had entered the Persian Gulf to safeguard the Islamic Revolution of Iran, and it instilled a particular fear among the Arab states along its shores. The fear that Iran's revolution, which had resulted in a republic, might inspire their own populations to demand elections or republican systems. In such an environment, Saddam Hussein became the pillar of these monarchies. Baghdad was no longer just a neighbor. Wealthy Arab states turned him into the champion of regional dictators, a figure who could fight with a democratic Iran and contain its revolution. But then something happened that no one had anticipated. The severity of attacks by the Arab coalition led by Saddam Hussein became so intense that Iran declared either the waters of the Persian Gulf would be safe for everyone, or they would be safe for no one.
ما گفتیم که اگر امنیت در منطقه خلیج فارس که یک منطقه تجاری و شریان حیاتی نفت برای دنیای صنعتی است بناس امن باشه، برای همه باید امن باشه. اگر ناامنش کنند برای همه ناامن خواهد شد. امنیت در خلیج فارس تجزیه پذیر نیست. ما گفتیم که خلیج فارس و تنگه هرمز ما بیشترین اشراف رو بر اون داریم و بیشترین ساحل رو و بیشترین مرز رو و طولانی ترین راه کشتیرانی رو در خلیج فارس ما داریم.
And for this, it claimed to possess sufficient equipment. equipment for which no military procurement records were available. What was Iran referring to?
امریکایی‌ها از این اقدام ما بعداً به عنوان توانمندی‌هایی که در آینده در جنگ‌های آینده امریکا باش مواجه خواهد بود به عنوان توانمندی‌های نامتقارن یاد کردند.
Ba'athist Iraq, assuming Iran was bluffing, intensified its attacks. But suddenly, Iran began retaliatory operations, and the tanker war entered its peak with the emergence of a distinct phenomenon: Iranian fast attack boats.
به این لحاظ توانمندی نیرو در سپاه مورد استفاده قرار گرفت. مأموریت پیدا کردیم به خلیج فارس بیان. در کمتر از 20 روز یعنی 18 روز بعد اولین عملیات مقاومت رو در یک سال 66 در اعماق خلیج فارس در شمال غربی منطقه جزیره فارسی در نزدیکی آبهای سرزمینی عربستان انجام دادیم و در ازای به دنبال اون بیش از 140 عملیات مقاومت انجام دادیم. 10 عملیات دیگه انجام دادیم. 17 عملیات موشکی انجام دادیم.
The waters of the Persian Gulf gradually turned into a different and unpredictable stage. It was no longer just fighter jets and long-range missiles that defined the battlefield. Now, small, high-speed boats had entered the equation. Their design was simple, but their strategy was unprecedented. Instead of relying on a conventional navy and engaging directly with large fleets, Iran moved towards breaking the rules of naval warfare. These boats operated in groups, hiding in the ambiguous space between the coast and commercial routes, like shadows that could vanish at the edge of radar detection at any moment, only to reappear moments later at very close range and turn into an immediate threat. At first, even foreign military analysts viewed them with skepticism. Boats smaller than coastal patrol craft, equipped with light weapons, seemed insignificant compared to warships fitted with advanced radar systems. How were they supposed to reach oil tankers? Especially since the West was confident these vessels would never gain the capability to launch strategic missiles. The United States had previously tested the idea of launching missiles from small craft, and the results had been disappointing. The conclusion was that American military power could only operate with confidence from large vessels.
چیزی که تعیین کننده اساسی است که مثل روح حاکم بر همه عوامل دیگه است، عامل آدمه، عامل پاسداره. این باعث می شود که در اون زمین بازی ما تعریف بکنیم، بازی کنیم و دشمن خودمون رو مجبور کنیم که در این زمین بازی با ما وارد نبرد بشیم.
So, on paper, maritime trade routes from the Strait of Hormuz to Kharq remained under the dominance of Iraqi aircraft. But soon, the world saw the balance shift. Aircraft could not remain in the sky at all times, and providing continuous naval escort for Iraq seemed impossible. By the time large oil tankers attempted to navigate through Iranian islands and pass through the Strait of Hormuz, it was often too late. Fast attack boats could reach tankers in an instant, open fire on them, and disappear like shadows among the waves, especially given that Iran possessed several strategic islands in the heart of the Persian Gulf.
سرعت بسیار بالا، جستی بسیار کوچیک و اثرگذاری بسیار سریع و زدن ضربه و برگشت از ویژگی‌های نیروی دریایی سپاه پاسداران انقلاب اسلامی است.
Iran, which previously struggled to damage even a single Iraqi vessel in exchange for losing 3 of its own, had now reversed the equation. For every Iranian ship damaged, Iran struck 3 Iraqi ships. The story reached major global news outlets.
This is the kind of sight that has sent tremors through finance ministries and stock exchanges all over the world. Oil from the Gulf is still vital, and getting it out depends on confidence.
It's not so many days now since there was one mine stretching on the sea. One ship went on it, we go for our own engine into the marine. The same thing can happen to us.
What would happen? We don't know. We don't know. We actually don't know. So we have our safety ways to do things, to fight fires, you know, and fight gas blowouts. So we would take that kind of action.
Strikes on Iraqi tankers flying the Kuwaiti flag paralyzed the economies of both countries. Kuwait, as the primary financier of Iraq's war against Iran, and Iraq itself, became the center of this pressure. As a result, Arab rulers turned to their last remaining option: bringing the greatest naval force in modern history after British colonial dominance into the Persian Gulf.
The kingdom is committed to defend itself and its interests and its friends. However, we would prefer always to see a peaceful solution to all these issues there.
In January 1987, Kuwait requested that its tankers be reflagged under the United States so that the US Navy would protect them. Global rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union over influence in the region, and fears of the closure of the vital Strait of Hormuz, led Washington to accept the Kuwaitis' request to intervene.
Our immediate task in the Gulf is clear and should not be exaggerated. It is to escort U.S. flag vessels, a traditional role for the Navy, and one which it has carried out in the Gulf as well as in other areas. Most recently, there's been some controversy about 11 new U.S. flag vessels that have been added to our merchant fleet. Let there be no misunderstanding. We will accept our responsibility for these vessels in the face of threats by Iran or anyone else. If we fail to do so, simply because these ships previously flew the flag of another country, Kuwait, we would abdicate our role as a naval power. And we would open opportunities for the Soviets to move into this choke point of the free world's oil flow. In a word, if we don't do the job, the Soviets will, and that will jeopardize our own national security as well as our allies.
Now, Iran had to face not only an alliance of Arab states, but also the world's most powerful military force. The mobilization of popular forces towards the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz began.
و ما در این منطقه اجازه نخواهیم داد که به بهانه دعوت یک دولتی، حالا چه دولت کوچک چه دولت بزرگی، این دولتی که دعوت کرده دولت کوچک و غیر قابل اعتنایی هم هست، اما هر دولتی هم دعوت میکرد و بدون دعوت هم اگر میخواستن بیان، ما گفتیم ما اجازه نمیدیم که اینها بیان قلدر معابانه مثل گردن کلفت سر محله وایسن اینجا بگن تو اجازه داری که عبور کنی، تو اجازه نداری عبور کنی. اینها که بخوان گردن کلفتی و قلدری در خلیج فارس نشون بدن، خودشون آسیب پذیر هستند و ما اجازه نخواهیم داد که آمریکا یا هر قدرتی دیگری بیاد اینجا بخواد نبض خلیج فارس رو در دست بگیره و سیاست‌های خودش رو در اونجا اعمال کنه.
Iran was on the path to permanently changing the status of the Strait of Hormuz. But would the power of the United States allow it?